In a case like this where we have hostages, we cannot end this war allowing our enemies to succeed in using hostages to their advantage. It's difficult for me to talk about this because I know what it's like to be incarcerated. I know what it's like to be tortured. I know what it's like to be abandoned. Yeah. So my heart goes out to the families of the hostages and the hostages themselves. But unfortunately, hard decisions sometimes have to be made. And we have to admit that the way we end this war will set a precedence for the future. We cannot continue to endanger the lives of our people by allowing our enemies to weaponize our love for each other.
It's a very strong point that you made there. I do have to play devil's advocate, though, for a minute, because you said with response to the ceasefire in Lebanon that we can't put people in uniforms, we can't put people in danger zones and not fight to protect them. Each individual life is so important. And yet, on the other hand, the hostages are essentially soldiers fighting for us in Gaza or being trapped in Gaza. How do we not bring every one of them home? How do we reconcile between those two?
This is one of the hardest issues an elected leader can face. There was one MK who, during one of the Lebanon wars that we've waged, made the following statements. She said, if my son, who was a paratrooper at the time, were taken hostage, I would scream like crazy outside the Rosh HaMemshala's office to bring him home at whatever cost. But then I would go in to see the Rosh HaMemshala and tell him privately, do what is good in the eyes of the country.
Wow.
For the needs of the country, for our better, for our welfare as a country. I should tell you that I faced a situation where I was given a choice of being released in exchange for the release of numerous prisoners, with blood on their hands, security prisoners. And when Esther, my wife at the time, Aleh Shalom, came to see me with this idea from the Prime Minister, she said, the decision is yours.
Wow.
You have no hope of getting out right now, so you're facing the rest of your life in prison. And before you make a decision, know that I will stay with you, whether you're in prison or you're in the midbar. I would not be allowed to come home, ever. So I thought about it, and I said, no, I won't go along with this, because I had to take into consideration the effect of releasing these people, these murderers, not just on the country, but on the victims' families. And I couldn't do it. There are many soldiers, Mayan, who have written letters to their parents or their wives saying that if they were taken hostage, that nothing should be done to secure their release that involves the release of prisoners or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen that.
This is something we have to keep in mind now. As I said, it's hard for me to talk to the families of hostages because I understand their pain and their longing to see their loved ones and the nightmares they have at night thinking about their conditions. But I will not be manipulated by the enemy because that's what's happening. They are weaponizing our love for one another, and we can't allow that to happen.
Jonathan, you are such a human person. I mean, you hear yourself talk right now, and it's beautiful. But you wrote something a few days ago that I actually want to read on. It was in you have this WhatsApp distribution group. I follow you very closely. I like to read your comments, and you said this: I have long believed that the greatest killer of our soldiers is the IDF. The tactics being employed in Lebanon involve a form of urban warfare that plays right into Hezbollah's hands. Instead of going house to house, which caused the death of these three brave Golani soldiers, it was a day that some soldiers had passed away. You said the army should simply destroy suspected enemy-held villages with artillery and burn them with napalm. So some might say this constitutes a war crime. I mean, you're talking about large-scale demolition of probably a lot of civilians. Elaborate. I mean, what's your actual vision here with regards to the enemy?
I could give you a quick answer by saying one person's tactics, acceptable tactics, is another person's war crime. We have to remember where we are geographically. We have to remember who we're fighting. And we have to remember that what's called jus in bellum, the laws of war, are somewhat elastic.
Okay.
I'm not in favor of bombing a city that's full of civilians unless you've given those civilians fair warning to evacuate. The problem here is that we're fighting a determined enemy, a ruthless enemy that embeds itself within the civilian population. And just as I said before, we cannot allow our hostages to be weaponized against us, our love to be weaponized against us. We cannot allow our compassion for innocent or not civilians to prevent us from destroying the enemy.
So Hezbollah using the
correct. We have to remember that we value life as opposed to the enemy. And I particularly value our own lives. We cannot and must not engage in urban warfare. It's a kind of warfare that shows a reckless disregard for the lives of your own soldiers. This is why people like Sima Hassan, a wonderful person who heads the Mothers of the Fighters organization and who has children at war, has been trying desperately since the beginning of the war, to get the army and the government to understand that it's better to use bombs than bodies to clear an area. I think the key thing is that when you give fair warning, it's already enough. It's the bare minimum.
Leave with the civilians then. I mean, if we send flyers and say, hey, we're going to come in, we're going to bomb this town, bomb this village, why would we be able to actually attack the enemy that way? Aren't they going out with the civilians at the same time?
They could. But that's why you have a system to check, to clear those leaving.
In other words, let them leave, but check them on their way out.
Yeah, this happened, for example, in Fallujah in Iraq, where the U.S. Conducted a very interesting counter-insurgency war in an urban setting, and they, as opposed to Ramadi, which was kind of a disaster, in Fallujah they actually filtered the people coming out and housed them, and then proceeded to destroy Fallujah block by block. There are many things you can do to filter out people, and the security services are very well experienced at doing that. So if I've been asked, well, what if the terrorists refuse to allow the population to leave? My answer to that, it's the fortunes of war. I am more concerned for the welfare of our soldiers than anything else. I was once asked by a group of Tanchanim, young guys and girls for that matter, who were going off to war for the first time, where does their loyalty lie? And I thought about it, and I remember what my father told me. He said, you don't owe your loyalty to the flag or the country or the parliament or the president or your commanding officer. You owe your loyalty to the man or woman on either side of you. And I have that same loyalty towards the men and women who don our uniforms and put themselves in harm's way to defend us.